afternoon, Sarah here, the Business Fixer. So I'm hoping, because I've changed the background back to what it should be, that the quality of the video is going to be okay. We shall see. So today I kind of wanted to reflect a little bit in terms of the potential changes that are coming, may be coming, that will affect businesses. So I have just come from a networking event held, largely organised with Malden District Council, alongside the Federation of Small Businesses, to talk about what happened in the budget last week and the potential impact that has on businesses. And there was a few things that were also kind of thrown into the mix that I thought also would be relevant. So today, what I really want to do is talk about those changes, and I would love to hear in the comments any impact that you think some of these changes are going to actually have on your business. Now, I think one of the key aspects that I truly believe is we won't really know the true impact, particularly from the budget, until probably this time next year, because a lot of the changes don't actually come into effect until April next year. So we've got some time to adapt and plan. And I think one of the fundamental things that I would say to all businesses, and this was one of the really key pieces of advice that came from this morning's networking event, is that it's imperative that you speak to your accountants now. You know, they are the experts in terms of your tax planning. They will know your specific circumstances, because I think some of these changes are going to impact different businesses in different ways, you know, depending on, for example, how many employees that you have. Are you close to retiring? Are you considering selling your business? All of these, you know, it all depends on your individual circumstances. Okay, so let's talk through some of the budget changes first of all that I think is kind of going to be key. So the first one, I think that's the biggest one that everybody is talking about, that will impact all employers who do have employees. And I think even those businesses that are sole director, sole shareholders, this will also impact, probably not massively. And the first thing in terms of employers' national insurance contributions. So from April 2025, the standard rate of employers' national insurance will rise from 13.8% to 15%. And the earnings threshold, which I think this is probably a big thing really, is that you have to be earning, you know, previously you had to be earning 9,100 before you had to pay any national insurance. That's been dropped to 5,000, which then means in reality, majority of employers are going to be paying employers' national insurance. But what they have done, which I think this bit is the bit that I found interesting today, that I think it hasn't been very clear perhaps, and that is that the employment allowance is being increased from 5,000 to 10,500 per year. So it helps actually offset that national insurance contribution liability. So what is the employment allowance? So effectively, every business, providing you are not a sole director or sole shareholder, you don't pay any national insurance unless you get this allowance of basically 10,500 as of next year. One thing I want to put on as a caveat is I'm not an accountant. You know, please speak to your own accountant to get clarification on these things. This is just general things that have come through that I just wanted to kind of flag and talk about the potential impacts. Then you've got, in terms of capital gains tax on business asset disposals. So this, I think, you know, it was interesting because I recently watched a training video from a business acquisitions, and I think they may have misheard these percentages, because they had said completely much larger percentages, which to me were astronomical. So effectively, when you dispose of assets, effectively you have this relief where you only pay a percentage of tax. Now, my understanding of this, and again, please check with your accountant, that this is when the assets are over $1 million. So it's increasing from in April, increasing from actually no, sorry. It's increased immediately. This is the key thing, from 10% to 14%. And then on or after April 2025, actually, this is where you need to double check this, but there is certainly an increase that's from 10% to 14% and then 14% to 18%. But I know that there has been some capital gains from speaking to the accountant today at the event. There's been some capital gains that's been changed immediately. So just please clarify with your accountants on that. But the key thing is it's going from 10% to 14% and then 14% to 18%. And also in terms of inheritance tax. So if there has been unspent pension contributions, they will now be included in your inheritance tax calculations, except when they're left to a spouse or civil partner. So that will have a big impact. And today they were also talking about, in terms of property within your sort of being, in terms of inheritance tax, there's things that are quite complicated on that side. I'm not going to go into too much detail at that. The only thing I would say is do speak, we never like to be talking about the when we all disappear. I know that, but we do need to make sure that we put the necessary plans in place, especially if you are wanting to leave your business to your children, you want to leave that legacy. What you don't want to do is for them to be whacked with a massive, great big inheritance tax bill. So do bear that in mind. Right. Now, like I said, tax is not my speciality. So now we're going to be talking a bit more about changes that are potentially coming in, which is a little bit more my bag, because this goes back to my lawyer days. So the key thing that I think is you need to be aware of for the, as business owners, as employers, is the potential changes that may be coming in relation to the Employment Rights Bill. Now, these are the proposed changes, and you have an opportunity to be able to respond to the consultation. So do bear this in mind. So the first thing is the abolition of the 0 hours contracts. Now, for some businesses, this could be a really good thing. So there was a bit of a debate today about, for example, Amazon. They often will have these types of contracts in place for their drivers, and that obviously would protect those drivers. However, I know that some of you, in particular small businesses, you want to have somebody that's on hand, but you can't actually give them confirmed hours, and therefore the 0 hours contracts can really be beneficial for you. So this, I do think this is a very much a swings and roundabouts thing. So it may mean that you decide actually you'd rather have no employee than to have somebody that has to have defined hours. I personally, I'm not a massive fan of the 0 hours contracts. I can see the benefits. However, I think ultimately, if you're going to make a decision to employ somebody, employ them and give them a set amount of hours, even if it's only 10 hours a week, etc., that you give them. Just, I personally think that is a better way to run a business. They're also wanting to ban fire and rehire practices. So this is effectively prohibiting employers from dismissing employees and rehiring them on less favourable terms. To be perfectly honest, as far as I'm concerned, you should definitely not be doing that in the first place. I do understand that potentially when businesses take over other businesses, there could be a situation where the terms that they've been on aren't practical, and I get that, but I think ultimately you should be taking on, if that's the terms that they've come with, then you stick to them. So I do think that is a positive side. The bit that I have the biggest concern over is the unfair dismissal rights, and that is that they are considering reducing the qualifying period for unfair dismissal from it being from the point in which you commence your employment instead of 1 year for employees to qualify. Now, the reason why I am against this, so when I practiced as an employment lawyer, it was at 1.2 years of continuous service, which I thought was probably a little bit harsh. I think 1 year, actually, it should stay exactly as it is, because within that year, you're going to know whether that employee is the right fit or not. And I personally think that if you do the unfair dismissal rights from the point in which they start employment, they can potentially bring a claim against you, and it just might be the case it's just not the right fit. And yes, you want to make sure that you comply with all the necessary procedures, and always speak to a HR consultant or employment lawyer to make sure that you are in compliance with that. But sometimes, employees, they do, unfortunately, can take the mickey. And I think that there is going to be a massive increase in employment tribunal claims if this is allowed. And ultimately, again, it's going to be one of those things that's going to put off employers employing people. They're more likely to go down the subcontractor type route. They're more likely to go to, for example, a virtual assistant type route rather than having in-house administrators, because ultimately they want to reduce their risks. Okay, so I think in terms of, for me, I think the budget isn't so much of a concern. To me, it's actually these employment law changes that are going to have a bigger impact, but also these things as a combined potential, I think, is also going to be a very scary time for small businesses. Now, the third thing is, now I think this is more relevant to the businesses that particularly have property. So this is where they are looking at the Renters' Rights Bill, and they're proposing that Section 21 evictions be abolished. Now, I'm actually of the view that I think a Section 21 notice should stay in place. I think the law is very much going more in the favour of tenants. And ultimately, I'm hearing so many stories where tenants are absolutely taking the mickey. And for me, that just isn't right. Yes, I know that people can play the system, but there's a difference between playing the system and just being, how can I put it, totally disrespectful. That where effectively I've heard stories where tenants have literally treated the property that's owned by the landlord as if it's not even theirs. And I heard this story about a landlord who is quite a reasonable landlord who wanted his property back, I think either to live in or to sell it. And effectively, they'd had a couple of months where the rent hadn't been paid. They'd sorted all of that out. They'd reached an arrangement. He then told them he wanted to sell it. And what they decided to do is they've refused to move. So they're staying put, and then suddenly decided that they're not going to pay the rent either, because they don't think it's fair that the landlord is making the decision to sell the property when it's their home. Now, this is where a rental property, yes, it's your home, but ultimately it's owned by the landlord, and they should be able to do with their asset as they see fit, providing it is reasonable. And that's the difference, I think. If they're wanting to sell it, if they're wanting to live in it themselves, that is more than a fair reason. So I personally think the Section 21 evictions, I think that should stay, but we'll see what happens. The other thing what they're wanting to do is introduce what's called periodic tenancies. Now, as it stands, if you have a 12-month tenancy, for example, and they don't renew it at the end, your tenancy goes to what's called a periodic tenancy. So it effectively runs continuously until either party terminates based on the terms that's in the original tenancy agreement. What they want to do is actually replace the whole fixed term thing. So you don't have a fixed term at all, and effectively the tenancies are indefinite until either party terminates. Now, to me, if they're going to get rid of the Section 21 eviction, option and then put it to that, I think it's just going to make it near on impossible to be able to get a tenant out, and to me, this just seems to be going completely in the wrong way. I think if you want to do these changes, it's got to be one or the other. Personally, I think there should still be fixed term tenancies. Fair enough that you continue with the periodic afterwards, but I think you need to, because ultimately you don't necessarily know, again, same with the employment relationship, you don't know how that landlord and tenant relationship is going to be until you've been living in the property. If you're in a situation where the property's not looked after or the tenant's not paying rent, yes, you can evict somebody for non-payment of rent, but they're also making changes in relation to that is increasing the length of time that you have to give notice. So how long should a landlord be out of pocket? A lot of landlords do have mortgages on those rental properties that they've still got to pay. Now, there are protections in place like insurance, but it's going to be getting to the point where particularly smaller scale landlords who might only own one or two properties are going to not want to get involved in it because it's going to be too messy, it's going to be too scary. And actually then it's going to make it easier for the bigger landlords who actually, there are some commercial landlords, like for example, there's an organisation called Leaf Living that basically buy brand new houses from developers and they rent. Now, as an organisation, I actually can speak very highly of them. They look after their tenants. They really do go above and beyond. Their systems and processes are brilliant. But you've then also got individual landlords who have a massive, great big portfolio, and all they then care about is the money that's coming from them. And I think in those situations, by making these changes, it's going to help those larger landlords because they're just not going to care. Whereas actually the ones that often are the landlords who just have one or two, they're more likely to probably treat their tenants right, and they're making it harder for those. So, generally speaking, I don't agree with the changes that they're proposing based on, I've been a tenant for a number of years. I know what it's like being on that side of the fence, but I've also acted as a lawyer in the past for landlords, so know also what that's like on that side of the fence. So I think ultimately, over the next couple of years, we just don't know what changes are going to happen. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this, but we know that obviously Trump has been elected in the States. We don't know what potential impact that's going to have. And a lot of people will think, well, that's over in the States. How does that affect us? Well, there is a big economic relationship between UK and the US. And it will ultimately potentially have an impact, whether we want it to or not. How we don't know yet. But I do think the one thing I would say with all business owners right now is it is going to be a roller coaster over the next few years. We don't know what is going to happen. We don't know how all of these things, if they get implemented, how they're going to actually really affect businesses. We can project, we can foresee, but I think you really do need to be prepared. And this is where the mindset side of things really does kick in. I'm a strong believer that in these types of challenges, that there are always opportunities, right? And I think that's where with these things, you have got to look at it as there's got to be an opportunity in these changes, right? Now, it might be the fact, and some people won't like this, that you end up having to automate a bit more of your services. It could be, like I say, that you end up having virtual assistants rather than actually employing administrators. There are things that you can potentially do to mitigate the situation. Some of you may literally take the view of, and I do agree with this viewpoint, that if you have got a cracking team that are really working for you, who believe in what you're trying to build, in the vision, you've got a solid culture in your business, then you're not going to want to jeopardize losing those staff. And it might be that for some of you business owners, because you value your team, because without them you can't potentially do what you do, that you may then decide that actually, if there is a financial hit, you take the hit yourself and to be able to keep that team. But each business will have to make a decision based on their own individual circumstances. Okay. So my advice to you guys is buckle up. It's going to be a bit of a roller coaster, but look for the opportunities that are there. And ultimately, as a business owner, one of the key aspects is having that resilient mindset. I've talked about this week in some of my posts about resilience and about, actually having the right mindset. I am a fundamental believer that success is 80% mindset and 20% hard work. So if you have got the right mindset, then all of these challenges that may well be coming towards us over the coming months and years, you'll be able to overcome them. If you are struggling with your mindset, if you are worried in terms of these potential changes, or you're just kind of at that point in your business, you're like, you know what, I just can't do this anymore, then I would ask you to please reach out to me. If you just simply want to have a chat, please, about the challenges in your business right now, just literally put in the comments chat. That's literally all I'm asking you to do, is just put the word chat, and I will reach out to you, and we can just literally just have it'll be a free conversation, and just see, if there's ways in which I can help you, or at least give you a steer in the right direction. So I appreciate today's been a bit of a longer live, but I hope you've got some value. Like I said, I'm not an accountant. Please go and speak to your accountant in terms of to get the right advice regarding what tax implications how they will impact you. I'm also not a practicing lawyer anymore, so I'm not in the thick of it like I used to be, but certainly do keep an eye out, and if any of these changes are things that particularly resonate with you, please do participate in the consultations. So thanks guys for listening, and I will see you all again very